I'm Lester Loschky, and I'm in the Psychological Sciences Department at Kansas State University, where I teach and do research on visual cognition, namely how seeing affects thinking and how thinking affects seeing. Teaching remotely during the COVID-19 pandemic has changed the way that I teach, and I think it's mostly for the good. Though I didn't expect that that would necessarily be the case when I first learned that we'd be teaching all of our courses online. Three ways that I've changed my teaching are: one, I've become more connected with my students because I know that we're all in this pandemic together. Two, I found other ways to get more feedback from my students and use that to revise my lectures. And three, I've worked hard to make sure that I'm getting through to my students in my lectures. When I learned that I would be teaching remotely, one of the first things that I wondered about was what to do about my quizzes and exams. I didn't trust the online presentation methods for test security, and more importantly, I knew that my quizzes and exams were already stress-inducing under normal conditions. So I decided I didn't want to compound that stress for my students by adding it to what stress they were already having now through the pandemic. But what to replace my quizzes and exams with was another question. Then I thought about my other big point item in my course, the term paper. That's something you do out of class, often at home and on your own time, and hopefully with a lot of thought, which is perfect for social distancing. So I decided to make the term paper worth twice the points that it previously was to make up for the missing exams. For the quizzes, I thought about my goals in using them. Those have been to ensure that students are attending class, that they're keeping up with the material, and to give them a chance to rehearse the material. Then it occurred to me that I could use discussion boards for the same purposes. Specifically, it would give them a chance to rehearse the material. It would make sure that they would be keeping up with the material, and that they would actually be watching the lectures. But it could do that without all the stress. And also, it would be perfect to do during social distancing. And despite the social distance, the physical distance, it would actually reduce students' emotional and intellectual distance from me and from the other students through the discussions. Now, a second question that I had was in how to make that switch from in-person lectures to recorded lectures. And one problem that immediately came to mind is, how do you get that instant feedback that you get in class from your students telling you if they understand your lecture or not? In class, you're either going to get blank stares if they don't understand it, or nods if they're getting it, or smiles if it really gets through to them. And I can even get answers to just an explicit question to them, like, does that make sense to you? All of that would be gone in a recorded lecture. But then it occurred to me that I could use the discussion boards to get that feedback. So after discussing these ideas with my colleagues in the Global Campus Distance Learning Office, I came up with a list of 3 questions that I wanted to ask my students to reflect on about my lectures each week. So 1, what was the main point that you got from the lectures or that resonated the most with you? 2, what was the most challenging part of the lectures or seemed least clear to you? And 3, what would you like to learn more about? I've used that feedback to then revise my follow-up lectures, or sometimes to make short extra lectures that explain in more detail those things that the students didn't quite understand or that they wanted to know more about. Now, I know that using discussion boards to get feedback in this way is not a new idea in education, but it is a new use for them for me. And that's come about through having to do the online teaching, remote teaching. Also, in recording my lectures, I've found that there are actually ways that I can make them more interactive like I do in class, in my in-person classes. So I frequently, while recording a lecture, will ask a question, and then instead of having the students talk together and come up with their own idea about it, which I do in my in-person classes, I'll ask them to pause the video and come up with their own answer, and then start the video again and compare their answer with mine. Also, since I teach sensation and perception, I've had to figure out how to present demonstrations that for my of these perceptual phenomena when I'm teaching remotely by pre-recorded lectures. And the problem is that in my classes, the way I've always done a lot of these demonstrations is using specific tools that I bring to class, and I can't do that remotely. So I've contacted my colleagues through professional listservs to get ideas for how to bridge that gap for specific perceptual phenomena. And more generally, I've had to get creative, and I've had to kind of think outside my own box. But a real bonus is that the new materials that I've created to help the students to experience these perceptual phenomena at home should be equally useful as homework assignments once we get back to teaching in person again. And also, as I've prepared to record my lectures, I've processed their contents with a sharper eye to making sure that I'm really going to be getting through to the students and revising them accordingly. So through these changes, I've found some silver linings that I'll likely continue when the online courses, the in-person courses start up again. The first is, as strange as it seems, I felt more closely connected to my students than when I saw them 3 times a week. And I think that's because I have made more efforts to find out how my students are doing, because I know we're all suffering through the pandemic in our own ways. And I want to take that into account this semester. I think that's really important. But second, I'm collecting more feedback from my students, and I'm using that to basically incorporate into my lectures and activities. And then, you know, and by the way, that's something that's I have felt that I was overdue for. I've been feeling I should do more of that, but now the circumstance has finally gotten me to do it. And then finally, I'm putting more effort into really getting through to my students and with my lectures. I've always done that, but now I have to take it up a notch because I have to make sure that it gets through in a pre-recorded lecture. So altogether, I think that these 3 things have made me a better teacher than I was before the COVID-19 pandemic. My name is Loschky, and I teach at K-State.